The most important thing in the school system is not educating kids. People like Michelle Bradley are real.
Yes.
Like, she made it to high school in Baltimore City Public Schools, and she can't read. Taxpayers have given this school system $400 million additional dollars a year. 90% of the kids in the school system are not proficient in math. How do you get there?
Welcome to a special edition of Just the Guys podcast. Our mission here is simple: to bring back shame. Shame is the negative feedback that forces correction, and today there are few areas in greater need of it than education, especially here in Baltimore City. So let's ask this question plainly. Is the failure of Baltimore City schools just incompetence and neglect, or is it something more intentional? Back in 1963, Congress recorded 45 communist goals for America. Goal 17 was clear: get control of the schools, use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda, soften the curriculum, get control of teachers' associations, put the party line in textbooks. Keep that in mind as we go through this conversation. Look at Baltimore City schools today, and it's hard not to see that playbook in action. Instead of raising strong, independent young men and women, we've built what my guest tonight calls a failure factory, a system that creates dependence. And this isn't abstract for me. I took the school system to court because, as I said on the steps of City Schools HQ,
we, the taxpayer, are funding our own demise. At about $18,000 spent per pupil, what has been the outcome? Year after year, Baltimore City Schools has been graduating students that aren't proficient in reading and in math.
That's an attack on the very future of our children. But it doesn't have to be this way. Imagine Baltimore, known not for the crime stats, but for producing doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, and artists. Imagine neighborhoods rebuilt by the very kids who once sat in these classrooms. Frederick Douglass once said, "Education means emancipation. It means light and liberty, the light by which men can only be made free." The inverse is just as true. When education is corrupted, dependence becomes bondage. And that's why tonight's conversation matters. You're about to hear from an investigative reporter who has spent years exposing the corruption and now has packaged it to share with the masses. So let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Emmy award-winning journalist and author of Failure Factory, Chris Papst. Take a look. So Chris, thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely.
And welcome to the Just the Guys podcast.
Thank you for having me.
This is actually a special episode of the podcast because we haven't really done any one-on-one type and book reviews or interviews like that. So
I'm honored.
Yes, this is the first one like we're doing here. And we're on the show, we're actually starting to dive in more in the aspects of communism and things like that. But one of those areas that we really should be focusing on is education. And with education, and before we even get started with that, man, we haven't sat down in a while.
It has been a while.
Yeah, I mean, because I remember you interviewed me at Forest Park, and then came up to headquarters, and we had an interview, and we've both been active since. But I actually want to, kind of start with some of the tough questions that I've seen on Facebook and other places from a few of my, just Facebook friends. Some people are saying that you're profiting off the failures of Baltimore City schools. One comment I got said, "Unless every cent he makes goes back to the kids, he's nothing more than a hypocrite." So how do you respond to that particular comment?
Well, the book just came out a couple weeks ago. Actually, 2 weeks ago, the book came out. So I haven't made any money. And I've spent 8 years of my life investigating Baltimore City Public Schools, and 8 years of my professional life entrenching myself into this system to learn things that no other people know. There's nobody else that can write this book, right? Because there's nobody else that has done and put the time in that I have done. And in a capitalistic system, if you separate yourself from other people, you get the rewards.
You get rewarded. Yep.
And so, the book is for sale, and I hope that people buy it, and I hope that people read from it. And I do find that question a bit interesting in that the school system is the entity that is getting $1.7 billion a year. Yes. That is the budget for Baltimore City Public Schools in 2024, which is the last full year for which we have data, because educational data generally lacks 1 year. Mm-hmm. And with that $1.7 billion, the school system produced 10% of its students that are proficient in math. So I would say if we're going to talk about profiting and we're going to talk about money, let's talk about $1.7 billion, not a $22 book.
Yeah.
Let's talk about $1.7 billion and 10% of the kids in this city in 2024 tested proficient in math, which means 90% of the kids are not proficient in math. Think about that. I mean, just let that really sink in. 90% of the kids in Baltimore City are not proficient in math, and taxpayers have given that school system $1.7 billion.
Those numbers are incredible especially when you think about profit and who's really benefiting, from that budget. I mean, $1.7 billion a year is not a small amount of money. That's
well, to put it into perspective, okay, in 2017, when Project Baltimore, Fox 45, first launched, when I first came to Baltimore in 2017 and started our investigation into city schools, the budget was $1.3 billion, okay? The graduation rate was 71%. Fast forward to 2024, the budget's $1.7 billion.
Yeah.
The school system's budget, annual budget, has increased $400 million.
Wow.
You know what the graduation rate is now? 71%. It's the exact same. So taxpayers have given this school system $400 million additional dollars a year.
Yep.
That's per year. And the outcome for graduation is identical.
Wow.
Identical.
So because some could argue that, inflation has happened, right? And especially we saw some hyperinflation over the past, 4 or 5 years. Is the school system just trying to stay ahead of inflation? And maybe this is just kind of an oddball question, but is it inflation because there's also been not the same number of students, correct?
It's far fewer students. So between 2017 and 2024, the school system has lost 6,500 kids. It's gone from roughly 82,000 to about 75,000.
Wow.
So what you're seeing is the school system is shrinking. So you have 6,500 fewer students, and you have $400 million additional dollars going into the system. So where is that money going? Well, the money is going to hire adults.
Yep.
So between 2017 and 2024, and what I do in Failure Factory is that it really is an 8-year diagnosis of Baltimore City Public Schools and what has happened in those 8 years. And I go year by year, and I show you where the money is, how many adults are being employed, how many kids are going there, attendance rates, chronic absenteeism, test scores, SAT scores. I lay it all out year over year. Yeah. So you really get a big picture of what is going on here. And for those $400 million a year, you have roughly 12 to 1,300 additional employees in the school system. So let's just analyze that for 1 second. So from 2017 to 2024, which is 8 school years, you have 6,500 fewer students. You have roughly 1,300 more adults to educate those students, and the graduation rate is identical. Where else can you see in America, in any industry, that you put that much more investment into something and you don't get any positive additional returns on it? But yet, what is Maryland doing? Next year, it's going to be $450 million more a year. The year after that, it's going to be closer to $500 million more dollars a year. At what point does somebody within the city, does somebody within the state say, you know what? We need to analyze this and see what's going on. That's what Failure Factory does.
So to sum it up, you're good at your job, right? And
I try to be.
You want to. There's reward for being good at what you do, but it's not that you're necessarily trying to profit off the failures of Baltimore City, but you're an investigative journalist, and this is what you've investigated.
So I have gotten a question similar to that before, and the way that I answered it was, my job is an investigative reporter, and I've been doing this job for 22, 23 years, and the way that I'm trained is to be an investigative reporter. It just so happens this book is about education. Yeah. But my first book was called Capital Murder, and I was an investigative reporter in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And Harrisburg, Pennsylvania has a unique distinction of being the only capital city in American history to ever file for bankruptcy.
Wow.
Because capital cities are supposed to be recession proof.
Yep.
That's where all the money from the state's coming, right? I was in the room in 2010 when Harrisburg, Pennsylvania became the first capital city to ever file for bankruptcy. And I covered that for 4 years and I wrote a book on it. So are you going to say that I'm profiting off of Harrisburg going into
some may
bankruptcy?
say that, you know.
I mean, I think that you can make that case off of anything. If you interview Jeffrey Dahmer, are you profiting off of a killer?
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, what journalists do is that our job is to inform communities about how their tax dollars are being spent, and about how their governors are governing all of their public officials. That is what we do. And to say that we're somehow profiting off of misery goes against exactly what journalism is all about. We're informing people, and that's what Failure Factory is doing. It is informing people about how Baltimore City Schools is unbelievably well-funded, but yet extremely underperforming.
Wow. So another question that I've seen, at least come across my page. Now, obviously, you're a white guy.
I am. Thanks for noticing.
But this seems to come up a lot, particularly in Baltimore City, because, you know, one, they say you're white, and then because you don't live in the city, you shouldn't be able to talk about the city. So how do you respond when people say, based on your race and your residence, you're not qualified to discuss these things?
Okay, so let's take the residency first. I do live in Maryland, so my tax dollars come to Baltimore, so that I can diffuse that immediately. Okay. I am a taxpayer in Maryland, and Baltimore City Schools, 70% of Baltimore City Schools funding comes from the state, to which I pay taxes. Okay, so I'm a taxpayer in Baltimore City.
So 70% of the school's funding comes from state level dollars.
Yes.
Okay.
So in most school systems in the state, Baltimore County, for example, 51% of that county's entire budget goes to the school system. So the school system's budget is roughly 50 to 60% local. In Baltimore City, it's about 18% local. And it's the same Baltimore County, Howard County, Anne Arundel County. Most of their school budgets are funded by the jurisdictions. Baltimore City is mostly funded at 70%, excuse me, by state taxpayers, of which I am one. So I feel that if anybody is in this state and you're paying taxes to the school system, that you have the ability to comment on it.
So what it sounds like, there should be more people outside of the city talking about this too, then.
There's a lot of people outside of the city talking about it. And I also I think that argument doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So I guess what whoever is making that argument is saying that if you don't live in Baltimore City, you can't comment on anything in Baltimore City.
Yep.
So
that's the spirit of the argument.
Okay. Well, my tax dollars go there. So I feel that I have the ability, or anybody in this state would have the ability, that if their tax dollars go to something, that they should be able to address it.
Now, how about the race response?
Well, I have received 2 NAACP awards. I received, in 2023, I received the Vanguard Award from the state NAACP. Wow. And in 2024, I received the Excellence in Education Reporting from the NAACP Randallstown chapter. So there are some African Americans in the community that do feel that what I'm doing is important and legitimate, to the point where the state NAACP gave me an award for it. Wow. And I think that what we're seeing in Baltimore City with the way that the education is going, who's getting hurt the most by that? I mean, this is a school system that is 93% minority. Yep. Baltimore City Schools is 93% minority. And what we just talked about a few minutes ago is 90% of those kids are not proficient in math. Somebody needs to say, hey, this is not good. Yeah. We need to improve these student outcomes.
Wasn't the foreword or the preface written by
the NAACP?
Yes.
Yeah. So the foreword of the book was written by Barbara Desmond, who for 15 years was the education chair of the Maryland State Conference NAACP.
Okay.
Dr. Desmond, in my opinion, and I think that in many people's opinion in this area, is one of the foremost experts on public education.
Let's go back into, I guess, a little bit of Project Baltimore back in 2017. What kind of drew you in to investigate Baltimore City schools in the first place, and how do you uncover that in the book?
Well, as I said before, I'm an investigative reporter, so I'm not necessarily interested in education. I wasn't necessarily interested in the bankruptcy of Harrisburg. I'm interested in being an investigative reporter.
Right.
And as somebody who's been trained in this profession, you're looking for questions that don't have answers. And in 2017, when Project Baltimore first launched, this was our question. The question was that we were looking at Baltimore City, and we could see through federal data, through the census. And the census does a lot more than just count people. The census does a lot of things. And one of the things that it does is that it takes the 100 largest school systems in the country, and it ranks them in terms of per pupil funding and spending.
Yep.
And at the time, Baltimore City was number 3. So you look at Baltimore City in 2017, again, when Project Baltimore was forming, and we could see that it was one of the most funded large school systems in America. We also could look at federal data, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is known as the nation's report card, and we could see that it was one of the lowest performing. Detroit, Cleveland, and Baltimore.
Yep.
They're always the 3 lowest performing large school systems in America. So how do you have one of the most funded school systems in America that is also one of the lowest performing school systems in America? And that was the simple question that launched Project Baltimore 8 years ago that led to this book.
What shocked you the most about what you found so far?
I would say the most shocking thing to me was when I got here, when I got to Baltimore, and I sort of established myself as I'm going to be the education investigative reporter in this area. I had people come to me, teachers, administrators in North Avenue, and there's many of them that see what's going on and want to speak out, but they want to be anonymous because they don't want to lose their jobs. And they would come to me and they would say, you need to understand when you're looking into all of this that the most important thing in the school system is not educating kids. The most important thing in the school system is the data, because the data leads to money, the $1.7 billion.
Yes.
And I didn't want to believe that when I first started hearing it, because I went to public schools. My kids go to public schools. My wife went to public schools. I'm from Pennsylvania. And my dad was a public school teacher for 35 years. So to hear people tell me that was something I didn't want to believe. And 8 years later, sitting in this chair, I think that in the 250 pages of this book, we lay out how that's actually true.
Wow. How
the school systems, I had a teacher come to me in Baltimore City Schools, been there for 20 years. And what she said to me was, and her name's Dana Casey, she's in this book. She says that the school system's priority is not educating students, it's passing students. So what does that mean? What that means is that when you pass a kid, you're moving them to the next grade.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter what their educational outcome is. It doesn't matter if they've mastered the current grade that they're in. It doesn't matter what their grades are, their attendance records. You move them to the next grade because you continue to get the funding for that kid. And as a teacher who was in that school system for 20 years, her argument is that the school system doesn't care if the kids learn. The school system cares the kids are in the seat at least once a year so they can get the funding, and they care about the $1.7 billion. And that sounds harsh, right? But let's go back to what we just talked about. 90% of the kids in the school system are not proficient in math. How do you get there? How do you get to 90% of kids in that school system are not proficient in math unless that teacher's actually right? It's not about learning. It's not about educating. It's about passing, and it's about money.
I mean, you're an investigative reporter.
Sure.
And there comes a level of I would say, detachment from the job, I would say. But you seem pretty passionate about what you're finding here, especially when it comes to education. Like, does it matter what the data says? Are you like getting some level of sympathy, empathy towards what's going on? Or is it just about the data when you're doing the reporting?
So when I go through the data, so as an investigative reporter, I'm very interested in data, and it's a lot of the stories in this book were stories that the people didn't necessarily tell us about. We found, and we tell. One of our investigations, and a lot of our investigations that we've done over the past 8 years have gotten millions of views all around the country. They've gone viral. And one of the ones that we did was actually mentioned at the White House earlier this year when President Trump signed the executive order to dismantle the Department of Education. He mentioned one school system in that speech, and it was Baltimore. And he said 40% of the high schools in Baltimore City had 0 students test proficient in math, which was true. And that was Project Baltimore's data. That was my data. And our producer found that data. And the way he found it was we looked through state testing data, which is, if you go on the Maryland State Department of Education's website, they have all this data there, but it's not organized. There's no reason to it. It's just there. And what we have to do is that we have to take that data and we have to make it make sense. Like, we got to look at the numbers and extrapolate what it actually means. And we found that 40% of the high schools in Baltimore City had 0 students proficient in math. And then when the president talked about that earlier this year, that story went viral again. And that's what we do, though. Like, we find this data and we try to show people, we try to show the community, we try to tell them this is real. Like, the school system's not going to tell you this. The school system doesn't want you to know this. And if they wanted you to know it, they would have told you. But the media had to tell you because they know it. They know exactly
they know.
They know exactly what their data looks like. They know exactly what it is because data is money. And if they were honest about it, they would just tell you, but they don't. And that's where we come in, where we look at the numbers after they send them to the state, after the school system sends them to the state, and then we can break stories like that and say, listen, you gave that school system $1.7 billion. 40% of the high schools did not have one kid test proficient in math. Thousands of kids, not one of them could pass a state math test.
But I mean, you're seeing this, like, because you're doing these interviews and you have a lot of them outlined in your book. But how do you, I guess, not develop some type of, I guess, I don't want to say emotional attachment per se, but it's like your heart goes out for these people. Does that ever happen to you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All the time. I mean, I'm a human being. I tell the story in the book of a woman, Michelle Bradley, who 40 years old, can't read. And I didn't know that going into the interview. I learned that during the interview. All I knew going into the interview with her was that she had made it to high school in Baltimore City Public Schools, dropped out, and now she has 2 daughters in city schools, and she wanted to talk to me just about her experiences. So I went and I spoke with her, and I learned during the interview that she can't read, and this is a woman that has 2 kids in the school system. And my heart broke for her. She was living in low-income housing. She couldn't even control her own thermostat.
That's that story?
That's that story.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think I started reading that one, and because it was a little hot in there, wasn't it?
Yeah. She couldn't, it was in the middle of winter, and it was like 90 degrees, and she didn't have any control over her thermostat because it was government-controlled housing. And
you got to get the book. He tells that story in the book, so you got to read that. But go ahead.
And then she, it was heartbreaking because I have 2 daughters, and I can only imagine what it would be like if I would not be able to help them with their schoolwork. And as a journalist, you try to separate your emotions from the stories because you're trying to be as objective as possible. But we're also human. And you interview somebody like Michelle, and it's heartbreaking, and you want to help her, and you want to do all you can for her. And quite frankly, the way that a journalist looks at that is, I'm helping by writing this book to let people know that people like Michelle Bradley are real.
Yes.
Like, she made it to high school in Baltimore City Public Schools, and she can't read. She's 40. It's happening still today.
Yeah.
That kids are getting to high school in this school system that can't read. And Michelle was cleaning houses. That's all she could do.
Yeah.
And she explains this in the book. Like, I can't fill out job resumes. I can't do things like that. So she was cleaning houses for a living, and doing her very best to help her kids, but there's only so much she could do. She couldn't help them with their schoolwork.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about the bureaucratic machine that you often mention. The city of Baltimore is actually one of the largest employers in the city, in which and that creates a system where silence protects the hand that feeds you. So when we see a lot of people not willing to speak out about certain things, like in city government, things like that, but I think that same situation is happening within the schools. So how does that really connect to what you've uncovered? Are there a lot of people not willing to speak because of how big the machine is?
Certainly. Oh, absolutely. $1.7 billion, man. Like we keep going back to that, and I keep mentioning that because the point of failure factory is just that. If the school's budget was half of that, if the school's budget was a quarter of that, that's still a lot of money. And you're talking about $1.7 billion. You're talking about the 1,200 or 1,300 additional employees over the last 8 years, many of them making very healthy six-figure salaries. There's a lot of people making a lot of money. And I have a lot of really good sources in Baltimore City schools, people that work at North Avenue, the headquarters of the school system, principals, assistant principals, teachers, because there are a lot of people that are looking at it who work in the school system and know this isn't right. But they're making $150,000 a year, and they have a great pension, and they have off during the summers, and they have off for Christmas, and they have off for Easter and Thanksgiving, and they don't work weekends.
Yeah.
They have good jobs. So they don't want to lose those jobs. They have kids. I fully understand that. And they contact me on a regular basis, which Failure Factory discusses all the anonymous sources that we have spoken to over the past 8 years. And they're telling me what's going on. And they're just leading me in the right direction. And they're just like, hey, go look under that rock over there, but you don't know who told you to go look under that rock. That's largely what I'm dealing with. And I'm extremely thankful for those people. And I wish there were more of them. There's a lot.
Yeah.
But I wish there were more, because I know that there's a lot more rocks that need to be turned over to see what's under them, because $1.7 billion, I think it's even hard for a lot of people to fathom how much money that actually is.
Yeah.
That is an astronomical amount of money. And it's going for the sole purpose, the singular purpose we're told as taxpayers is to educate kids. Yeah. Well, if 90% of your kids aren't proficient in math, how can that $1.7 billion be solely to educate the kids?
Yeah, it definitely can't be. Now, as far as the bureaucracy, though, like what would it take, I guess, to break it? From what you've seen or from what you've reported, what do you think it would take to maybe break up that bureaucracy?
All right, I'm going to try not to get too corny here. All right, but that's why I wrote Failure Factory. The idea of Failure Factory is to show people everything that's going on. And over the past 8 years, we do a report like on the 40% of the kids or 40% of the high schools, no kids proficient in math. And that would blow up. And then it would go away for a couple months. And then we do another huge story. That would blow up. And then it would go away for a month or two. And then another huge story. But what this does is it puts them all in one place, and they're all right there. And when you see them, page after page after page, you really start to go, oh my gosh, what, really? Like, these things are happening in Baltimore City Public Schools? So the idea is to inform people, what journalists do, to try to tell people how their community is, how their tax dollars are being spent, what they're getting for those tax dollars. And I think that in a city like Baltimore, you got to have the voters demand more, because the public officials in this in the city are not demanding more.
Yeah.
I mean, as we sit here right now, I can't name for you one elected public official who is screaming that the school system needs to better educate kids. I mean, the mayor's not doing it, the president of city council, the governor's not doing it. I mean, if you know of one, please let me know, but I don't know of any. And there are a lot of people in the city. There's a lot of good, great people in this city that want better.
Yep.
They need to vote the way that they feel the city needs to move forward. And I think a lot of times in Baltimore, that's not necessarily happening, because if it were, you would think that you would have at least one elected official who is saying, hey, you think that maybe we should not have 90% of our kids not proficient in math? Like, who's saying that?
No, I haven't seen anybody. As a matter of fact, I remember when I was running around town and I had ran into Robert Stokes, who was former councilman in the 12th district, and he was the chair of the education committee at the time. And I had asked him, why is it that you won't even hold a hearing with Dr. Santelice to find out what's going on with these schools? And he said, well, because she's a black woman. And that was the end of his response. So you're right. There's no one really speaking up. Now, you did mention something just a moment ago about it alludes kind of to the 24-hour news cycle where a story hits and then it's gone. Mm-hmm. Do you feel, though, that people are really kind of desensitized to these things? Because there's a couple of times that also in the book you mentioned when you reported on something, there were some people that responded, well, that's not news. That's been going on for years. Do you feel like people are desensitized to what's going on in Baltimore City Public Schools?
People within the school system, certainly. I also think that you see that with a lot of people who had gone to the school system that now have kids in that school system. Again, Michelle Bradley. Michelle Bradley went to Baltimore City schools and it failed her. And now her kids are in Baltimore City schools, and she said it was failing them. Wow. So I think that you do have a level of that. And, to an extent, I understand it because it's been going on for so long. Baltimore City Schools has had one of the lowest performing school systems for decades. Yeah. This has been happening for a long time.
Yep.
And I remember, and I tell this story in Failure Factory, that we had done a story where we interviewed a teacher who said that kids were being graduated who couldn't read. They were literally getting a diploma certified by the state of Maryland that they could not read. And I had another teacher.
Hold on. Say it again. So they're getting a diploma that they can't even read the diploma.
Yes. Yeah, because they're illiterate and they're graduating from the school system.
Wow.
And again, goes back to what the teacher said. It's about passing, not about learning. That's how that happens. And I had another teacher say to me, and actually they emailed me, and they identified who they were, said they wanted to be anonymous. And then they're like, I saw that story and I don't even understand why that's news. Like, that happens. That's all the time. That's all the time. And I remember I wrote the guy back. I'm not going to say who he is, but I know him now, and he's a source now for me. And he's like, I don't think that you understand that is common. That's common. Happens all the time.
Wow.
And the guy's actual words to me, and I don't know if you've got that far in the book, but he says, I was stunned that you even felt that was news because it's so common. So to be desensitized to that, you're right. A lot of people in the school system are, especially people who have been there for 10, 15, 20 years. Most of my sources are people who have been there like a day to maybe 2 years. And they get there and they have these aspirations of going into the city schools and making a huge difference. And they start realizing right away, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. Like, you're not supposed to pass kids who can't read. But after 5 or 10 years, I've noticed I hardly have any teachers who reach out to me who have been there more than probably 5 years. Because at that point, to your question, it becomes normalized.
So let's talk a little bit about fear and, the silence that fear. I'm going to start with you because there was a a voicemail that I believe Fox 45 received, and this is in the book, but I actually want to say this. Eventually, Chris Papst is going to get himself killed. Baltimore City is a black city that's tired of the racist white honky trying to disrupt the black city with his racist lies targeting the black schools. So how do you handle this fear? You know, now you've kind of compiled it in a book. You've reported it for several years. Are you not scared as well?
No, I'm not. I think when we first started Project Baltimore and I came into this city and Fox 45 was doing these big promotions of investigating city schools, send us your tips, and we started doing really eye-opening reports, like the 40% of the high schools. Like in 2017, we started doing those stories after looking at state testing data. Yep. And they started to go viral because they're all just eye-opening stories about educational failures in the school system. And for the first year and a half, maybe 2 years, we got a number of emails like that. And we even got to the point where we had to call the police a couple times because people had gone a little too far. Yeah. And we just said, we had the police go to them and say, hey, listen, you're taking this a little far. You know, do you have any intent here of hurting Mr. Papst? And, you know, those things went away after about 2 or 3 years. And I'll tell you why. And I have not gotten anything like that in 5 years.
Wow, okay.
And the reason is, I think, is because I had to earn the respect of the community. And I think when I first came in, I had never lived in Baltimore. And I was working in D.C. I was an investigative reporter in D.C. So I went from Harrisburg to D.C. and then came here. So this new guy comes on, and he starts investigating the school system, and there's a lot of pushback at first. And I think after 2 or 3 years, when we showed people that Project Baltimore is serious about this and we're not going anywhere, I really do feel that we earned a lot of the respect of the community. And when I say that I have not gotten an email like that in 5 years, I mean it.
Wow.
Like they've completely gone away. Okay. And it's really rewarding for me because if you have another theory on why they went away, I'd like to hear it.
Spam.
But, no.
I'll get blocked for spam.
We go through our junk mail all the time. But even like on Facebook, Twitter, or X, all of the social media accounts, we used to get comments like that on them. They went away too.
Really?
And I really do think that it's because we earn the respect of the community and we said, listen, we're trying to help. Yeah. We're just trying to show you where your money's going and what you're getting out of it. And I think a lot of it was that we're interviewing the parents and we're interviewing the kids.
So none of this is coming from you, right? You're just asking questions.
The book is not driven by my opinion. The book is driven by the people that I speak with over 8 years, like Dana Casey, who said that the school system is focused on passing kids, not educating kids. And I try to keep my opinion out of it as much as I can. And I think that it lends itself to a better read because I'm interviewing the people that are in the system, that are telling you what they're seeing. I think Dana was a teacher for 25 years. Yeah. She's one of the rare teachers who have been there for a long time and still was like, this is not the way it's supposed to be.
How many times have you heard people say they fear retaliation?
Every day. Every day. Everybody fears retaliation. There's so few people that will speak to me on the record. And it's not just retaliation of losing your job and being fired. It's retaliation of, I'm going to make your life harder at work. And it's amazing to me that every single person I talk to says the same exact thing. Like I had a teacher that we interviewed in the book, and the teacher was explaining to me how there was a student that skipped 120 days of school his senior year.
Wow.
So there's 180 days. He skipped 120. And he graduated. And I ended up going to find that student. And I interviewed him in Failure Factory. I interviewed that kid in Failure Factory who told me that he didn't deserve to graduate, but still did. And this teacher comes to me to blow the whistle on this because she's like, what is this kid going to do when he leaves Baltimore City Public Schools? He does not have the education that he needs to be able to take care of himself and his family. The teacher was doing the right thing. And the teacher was terrified.
Wow.
Terrified of anyone finding out who they were because they were afraid that they were going to be retaliated against.
So my wife had a similar story because I'm not sure if you're aware of this. My wife was a former Baltimore City Public School teacher for 10 years. She was also a union captain or whatever they do, union rep, that's what it is, in her school. And she went and complained to the union about something, which is supposed to be an anonymous complaint about something at the particular school that she was working in at the time was doing. Supposed to be anonymous, but somehow the principal came back and directly directed her comments at her when it came to what was complained about. So we definitely see those that's on a small scale. So I can only imagine. You mentioned $1.7 billion budget. I can only imagine how other teachers are feeling. But also in the book, I mean, some of it reads kind of like I don't want to say mystery, but
I'm trying to make it interesting.
It's kind of like it is an investigation. So Sherlock Holmes type thing, because you mentioned in the book that a few people have code names.
Well, they're my anonymous sources.
So
McDonald's.
McDonald's,
yeah,
Yellow Flowers. So if you got to grab a copy of the book so you kind of get into it because it's really it's fascinating. Now I do want to ask. Does that ever, I guess, kind of challenge your credibility when people aren't able to show their faces or things like that?
Whatever anyone tells us, we don't report that unless we have the data, the documents to back it up. So McDonald's, Yellow Flowers, everything that they said to us, we backed up with documents, whether they were student transcripts, report cards, data from the school, official data from the school that maybe we weren't supposed to have. We have all that backed up. Yeah. And when you're doing a document story, a kid who misses 120 days of school his senior year and still graduates, somebody comes to you and says, hey, Chris, this happened. I'm like, okay. I need data. I need that kid's transcripts. Yep. I need that kid's report cards. I need that kid's name. I'll go find him. I need something. I can't just take your word for it.
Yeah.
And many, many times we get tips and people can't produce the documents and that story never makes air. That story never makes it into this book. Everything that is in the book is what people are telling us that we could corroborate directly firsthand. And in some instances, I would send the documents to people at North Avenue, not the anonymous sources I have there, that weren't connected to that particular student and say, can you look at this for me? And does this look right to you? And we would go through many different avenues of being able to corroborate that information before that story ever makes it to air. So again, it's go look under that rock.
Yep.
That's what we needed people to do, just to tell us where to look.
Yeah.
And most of the times, that's all that we need. We just got to be pointed in the right direction.
From just your sources alone and just kind of the reporting that you've been doing, it feels like there's potential for maybe a groundswell of people to really attack the system. At what point do you think people will say, I'm tired of being anonymous? And because the sources may be sitting right next to each other. They don't know, right? Because
they don't know.
Right? And at some point, it's like, well, everybody's now coming to me. At what point do you think there'll be a big enough groundswell to say, hey, like, we got to change this?
Well, the groundswell has to come within the community. It's got to come from the 550,000 people that live in Baltimore City. It's not going to come from the 10,000 people that work in Baltimore City schools, or the 11,000, which I think it is now. That's where it has to come from. And the people of the city have to demand more. They have to stand up. They have to make their voices heard. And they have to say, I need you to educate my kids better.
Yeah.
And there are people who are saying that. There's people like yourself. There's people like Yolanda Pooley. There's people like Jason Rodriguez. Like, there's people out there that are doing this.
Yeah.
You need tens of thousands of those people.
Absolutely.
And I'm hoping that people will read Failure Factory. They'll see all of this stuff in one place, and that it will create a better situation, because that is the role of the media, is to attempt to create a better community for all of us to live in by informing the people in that community about how their dollars are being spent and what they're getting in return. That is our job in the media, and I think that Failure Factory does that, and the hope would be that people see it and they rise up and demand better.
So we sued Baltimore City Public Schools, and it was, kind of a lot of your reporting that went into it, along with some, a lot of other things that were, discovered. And I do see that, some of this stuff legally can't be challenged, because it seems like school, like you go back to the bureaucracy, the schools they create a policy that kind of create another policy that allows them to escape the policy. For example, the grade changing. Now, we all know there has to be some level of grade changing in public schools. I mean, there could be makeup work. I mean, these things are legitimate. But from an ethical standpoint, it's like the amount of grade changing, or even when we were in the lawsuit, the amount of kids being passed despite missing 60, 90, 120 days of school was astronomical, right? So, what did you, think when, the lawsuit, kind of settled, and like, what was your kind of take on that?
I guess when I saw that one, I knew that it was going to be difficult for you to get a lot out of that. And it's because of this massive bureaucracy. I keep bringing this up because it is so important. It's the $1.7 billion. Yeah. Like, are you really think that the school system's going to give that up? Like, you think that they're going to let that go? No, what they want, and this isn't just a school, it's any bureaucracy, is that they want your money and then they want you to go away. Yeah. They want your money and they don't want you to ask questions. They want your money and they don't want you to even know where that money is going or what it's being used for. Now think about it. Let's say that you, Giovanni Patterson, got $1.7 billion from the state. What would you rather? Would you rather the state be looking over your shoulder the entire time, or would you rather them just turn away, walk away, and you can do whatever you want with that money? I mean, so...
Yeah,
right?
I get you. Yeah.
Yeah, you get the point?
Yeah.
And the school system's the exact same way. They want your money, and then they don't want anybody to question what they're doing. Yep. They don't want you to look under that rock. Yep. They don't want it. They just want your money. And quite frankly, we as a society, as voters, as taxpayers, we need to better understand that that's the mindset. Yeah. We have to understand that, because with the blueprint for Maryland's future, the new spending bill that came out of Annapolis, the school systems are going to keep getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of additional dollars. Yeah. And we, as a community, as society, we have to demand that money is being spent in a way that benefits our kids, not the adults and the employees in the school system.
Is Baltimore an outlier, or is this like a model of other school districts in America? Like, when you're highlighting here in Failure Factory, is this just Baltimore, or is this, potentially what we're seeing in school districts across the country?
Oh, we're seeing it spread in Maryland. I mentioned in Failure Factory about the lowering of academic standards. And what's happening is that the school systems are lowering their standards to meet the kids instead of raising the kids to where they need to be. Yep. And we know that is happening. I document that over the 8 years that I've been doing this. I document how they're lowering standards. And I'll give you just one example. In Baltimore City schools, there is a policy called the 50% rule. Okay? And what the 50% rule says is that a student cannot get below a 50% in a semester or a marking period for a grade. So it doesn't matter if that student never shows up to class, they take no tests, hand in no homework, hand in no quizzes, they don't do anything. Yep. They get a 50%. They get half credit. Now, why is that there? That is there because the school system, going back to Dana Casey, is worrying about passing kids, not educating kids. Now, if you talk to the school system, what they're going to tell you is they're going to say that the reason for the 50% rule is because, let's say a kid does miss the first 50 days of school. They just don't show up.
Yep.
They can come in on the 51st day and they still have half credit. Whereas if they miss 50 days of school and come in on the 51st day, if you start them at 0, it's going to be mathematically impossible for them to catch up. Okay, that's the argument from the school system.
Yep.
But if the idea of a public school is to prepare kids for the real world, in what job can you not show up and get paid 50% of your salary? You're teaching these kids that they can get credit for doing nothing. Now, let's think about this for a second, and then I'm going to apply this to your question.
Yeah.
A passing grade in Baltimore City is a 60. If the lowest possible grade you can get is a 50, you only have to earn 10 points out of the 100-point scale to pass a class. Okay? Go back to Dana Casey, the teacher.
Yep.
She's like, our kids know that. Our kids are smart. They're smart enough to understand that I have to give them half credit and they don't have to come to school for the first half of the year. She told me that she's had kids that have done the math and realized that they had enough points in her class that they didn't have to come to school for the next 2 months and still pass because she had to give them half credit for those 2 months. Okay? Now,
Kids are smart.
kids are smart.
Yeah.
They're very smart.
Yeah.
The kids will achieve the goals that the adults set
Absolutely.
for them. All right? Now, getting to your question. Anne Arundel County and Howard County, two of the higher performing school systems in our area, in the Baltimore region, they do not have the 50% rule. You know who does? Baltimore County. They adopted it about 10 years ago. And if you go back and look at the data, what you'll see is that the school system's academic performance, student outcomes were dropping. So what did the school system do? Instead of working to better educate the kids, they passed something like the 50% rule that creates more kids that are passing. They're not learning anymore, but they're passing more.
Wow.
And part of what Failure Factory is doing, and why I believe that this is a national book, even though it focuses on Baltimore City and the Baltimore City region, is because that mindset is spreading throughout the country.
Yeah.
It's come out of Baltimore City. It's already in Baltimore County. I've had a number of people in Pennsylvania who have reached out to me saying they looked into their policies and the 50% rules and their school board policies. But it's not just that. In the book, I give multiple examples like the 50% rule that school boards are adopting with the sole intent of passing more kids, because none of these policies educate more kids. What educates more kids are tutors and teachers putting in extended hours. Like, you have to work hard to educate a kid. Passing the 50% rule and passing a kid, that's simple.
So one thing too, we talked about the funding. So the average right now is up to about 23,000, I think.
Yeah.
23,000. Now, you made a comparison in the book of a high-performing school versus, and this was a behavioral school. I think it was Briscoe Academy or something like that. A low-performing school, and looking at the per-pupil spending on each of those schools. What was your reaction when you saw that difference, the 6,000 versus?
It's stunning. I think it was Poly, right? I think it was Poly.
Yes.
So you have Poly, which is one of the highest performing school systems in the city, schools in the city. And I think that their per pupil spending that year that you're talking about was around $6,000. And then Briscoe is somewhere around $50,000. And Briscoe, I believe the reason that story was in there is because that school did not have any kids proficient in any state testing. So there are, of the kids that are in that school, none of them passed any state test. 0% proficiency in the entire school. And their per pupil spending was around like $50,000.
$50,000.
But what you see oftentimes in education is that's where the money's going. Now, keep in mind, the principal of that school was still making $160,000 a year, and not one kid in that school could pass any state test. That goes back to, it's all about the data, and the data leads to money. Now, but you're going to say, but the data is terrible at that school. You're right, the data is terrible at that school. However, the graduation, there are kids that were graduating from that school that none of them were proficient, but yet it had kids that were graduating.
Wow.
And the thing about the state testing is that it's really difficult to manipulate that. You can manipulate your attendance, chronic absenteeism, graduation, grades. You can manipulate all that. State testing and federal testing is really difficult to manipulate. And that is how, in a school system like Baltimore City, we've already mentioned that 10% of the kids were proficient in math.
Yep.
We've already mentioned 71% graduation rate. How do you have a 71% graduation rate when 10% of your kids are proficient in math? And the reason you get there is because you can lower your standards to graduate kids, to pass kids. But if you're going to be proficient on a state test, you got to learn.
Yeah.
And learning's harder.
So haven't they relaxed the requirements on that as well for the graduation, relaxing?
Yes, they did.
And that was a result of some of your reports,
Yes,
wasn't it?
it was. So what had happened was in, let's say 2019. So in 2019, prior to that, there were 3 requirements to graduate with a diploma in Maryland. The first requirement was you needed 75 service hours, which is basically community service. Second one is 21 course credits that you had to pass, like 4 in math, 4 science, 2 life science, all that stuff, government. And the third one was that you had to pass state assessments in the 4 core subjects: math, English, science, and I think social studies. Well, Maryland wanted a higher graduation rate. So instead of actually educating the kids better, they just changed the graduation requirements. So now, as we sit here in 2025, there's only 2 things that the kids have to do. They got to get their 75 service hours, and they got to pass their 21 course credits. Students no longer in Maryland have to prove that they are proficient in math or reading or science to graduate. The state took it away. It's like,
so we're starting to see this.
You can't even make this stuff up.
So Failure Factory is kind of pinpointing Baltimore, but we are seeing this.
That's statewide.
State spread out.
That is statewide. And that also coincided, that change was made in 2020 to lower the graduation requirements that you have to pass standardized tests. You no longer have to, you have to take them, but you don't have to pass them. And that was done in 2020. What also happened in 2020?
The pandemic.
Yes. And one other big thing happened.
The election.
The blueprint for Maryland's future. So the blueprint for Maryland's future was first passed in 2020.
Wow.
Pumped billions and billions of additional tax dollars into public education. And what did politicians promise to taxpayers? They promised a return on that investment. So what do they do to hedge the bet? They lower the standards for high school graduation. So high school graduation will go up because kids that would not have graduated in 2019 are going to graduate now because you don't have to pass a state test. Yeah. So politicians in a couple years, if they're not already doing it now, are going to say, listen, graduation rates are up, and it's because we raised your taxes and we put more money into public education. What they're going to leave out is graduation rates are up because we made it easier to graduate.
Right.
The same year we passed the blueprint for Maryland's future.
I definitely thank you for joining me today on Just the Guys podcast. But I want to ask one last question. So what are some of the bright spots that you've seen during your investigations? And are there any stories that remind you of what education could be?
Yeah. So in Failure Factory, it's not just talking about what isn't working. We also talk about what is working. And there are schools in Baltimore City that are pulling kids from the same neighborhoods, that have the same funding, that are achieving at extremely high levels. And when you go to these schools, you can see what is creating that.
Okay.
And it always goes back to generally a principal who is extremely hardworking, who is devoted to their kids, and who simply is not going to let them fail. They're going to educate them. They're going to give them the resources that they need. They're not going to lower the standards to the kid. They're going to raise the kid to where they need to be. Those examples are in the book. They're inspirational, and they show what is possible and what the entire city could look like. It could look that way.
Wow. So if you haven't grabbed a copy already, get your book, get Failure Factory. It's available. Where can people find the book?
Anywhere.
Okay.
Anywhere books are sold. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, bookstores. If they don't have it on stock, because it might be sold out, they can order it for you. If you want a copy of this book, you can get it.
So I got mine on Amazon. It came in 2 days. I think I pre-ordered it. It came the day of release. I think
It's already hit #1 on 3 categories on Amazon.
Wow.
So we're off to a strong start. And I think that the book is resonating with people because so many people are living the stories that are in this book. And I think a lot of people think that they're alone. And what this book is showing you is that, no, you're not alone, and it's not normal. It's not normal. It's not normal for your child to be 4 or 5 grade levels behind in their education. It's not normal, and demand better.
So definitely go ahead and click the link down below. The link to the book will be there. You can grab a copy. It will be my Amazon affiliate link, so it definitely helps support the show, and it will help support Chris and for him to continue to do the work that he's doing. Thank you, Chris, for exposing that. And I hope everyone grabs a copy of the book and make sure you sign my copy.
Oh, I'm going to do it right now. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah. Thank you. All right.
Baltimore City schools are not just failing kids, they're creating dependence, and dependence is the foundation of control. In 1963, Goal 17 of the Communist Agenda warned, get control of the schools, soften the curriculum, put the party line in the textbooks, and 60 years later, Baltimore is the case study. But here's the good news. Shame can change things. When we shine a light on corruption, when we refuse to stay silent, we force accountability. So if you're a parent, a teacher, or just a taxpayer who's tired of watching kids cheated out of their future, don't accept this as normal. Speak up and demand better. Because education should mean what Frederick Douglass said, emancipation, light, and liberty, not bondage to a broken system. I want to thank my guest, Chris Papst, for his courage and relentless reporting, and I want to thank you for watching. This has been a special edition of the Just the Guys podcast, and remember to bring back shame. Peace.